Welcome to another CERT's IT Service Solutions podcast. In today's episode, our host, John Granger, invites Nick Thrussell, a well-experienced CIO across public, third and private sectors. They discuss the debated question, if an IT decade is 3 years, how does a CIO write a 5-year strategy? Let's dive into part 1.
So Nick, thanks ever so much for joining us. And we've not met before, so it'd probably be good for you and me and the audience just to do a bit of an intro. So Nick, what's your background?
Done CIO, IT director roles, and more recently moved into transformation piece of work, technology, digital on a national and global level for some big organisations, as well as, I suppose, step in and rescue for certain projects and also organisations to turn them around and get certain things over the line. So, I say, an eclectic taste. Always with an eye on and a foot in the technology world, I would say, John.
Any particular sectors? Have you done more in one particular area or across the board? Or
yeah, I would say he's probably more weighted in public sector, central government, local government, health. But I've done a fair bit of private and third sector as well. So a couple of large organisations in the third sector.
Excellent. So what that says to me, Nick, is that between you and I, we could probably write 4 or 5 books on various different war stories, and we might have some similar sayings in our arsenal, such as nailing jellies to a wall, plaiting fog, herding cats. Are any of those familiar, Nick?
Oh yes. I tend to use pushing water uphill. As well.
Very good. Very good.
Well, all those resonate really strongly.
Yeah. I think we're going to have a fun chat. So what we'll do, and for everyone listening, is when we use any particular examples, we will not make them identifiable or too specific. We have to sort of keep things in the round, but that doesn't mean we can't kind of get into some interesting topics. And Louise from CERTS has come up, I think, with a really good question, which actually got me sort of immediately thinking. So I don't normally read it out verbatim, but I think this is a good one to read out, which is basically if an IT decade, so if a decade in IT is actually only 3 years now, how does the CIO create his or her 5-year plan? It's really clever that the phrasing of that, and all just so much wrapped up just in that. So what I was thinking, Nick, is maybe we could explore the decade concept a bit first. But what's your thoughts on that, first of all?
I suppose the question's right on the point at this moment in time. With a complete shift in technologies and transformation, and where social and business engineering is driving technology and the pace it's moved at. What's the saying? A week's a long time in politics. Well, a week's a long time in technology now. Let's face it, in terms of the shift. So, a decade, 3 years. I think that's come to the fore very much so in the last 3 years.
Yes.
Is a 5-year strategy really a 5-year strategy now? Is it? That's the reverse question.
Yeah, I did a bit of prep for this, and I'm very embarrassed to say I had to get a calculator out, which I actually afterwards realised I didn't need to do that. But if we continued on a decade equals 3 years, obviously our 5-year plan is just a year and a half. So I went down that road. In any strategy, there's always some super tanker stuff, which we briefly spoke about before this call.
Yeah.
And then the more super tankers you've got, I suppose the more vulnerable your strategy is going to be to this kind of shortening timescale. I'm just thinking, for some folks on the audience who might not even know what we mean by super tanker. Do you want to just sort of quickly do that, and then just so we for some folks learning as well?
Sure. So if we define a super tanker as the real large cornerstones of technology that you need to implement to support an organization. You're talking finance systems, HR systems, bare metal platforms, how you run your systems and your network, whether you maintain it in-house or you're using one of the cloud providers, Microsoft, Amazon, Google, and so forth. These are the real heavyweight pieces of technology change that you may well actually only do once every 4 years or 5 years, but actually, they actually in themselves take 2 or 3 years to do. And I guess they're the ones that have been significantly challenged over the last 3 years because of the movements in, certain technologies and coming to the fore. But, are they still necessary, the super tankers? Yes. Do we need to do them differently? Yes. I mean, Agile's great, once you're in the framework, but I guess you need to have agility whilst you're doing Agile and doing a super tanker. And it's about being nimble on the ground and being able to adjust and move that super tanker
Yeah.
and spin it on a pinhead, which is not always easy, and it takes some brave decisions, and some courage.
Yeah. Yeah, that's getting me nervous already because when you're writing strategy that requires bravery and courage, that starts to and I'm not saying we've all been there, and it's a bit of a reality
Yeah.
in some instances. But I suppose the least amount of bravery and courage you can have in your strategy, the better.
Yes.
I
Consistency.
was thinking of this sort of rapid change, and I was just thinking of just a couple of areas, just very briefly, that are very obviously
Yeah.
changing really quickly. So maybe starting off with cyber and cybersecurity, how that really does seem to be playing along the kind of exponential growth in terms of the change of threats, the volume of threats, the different
Yes.
natures, and all the rest of
Yes.
it.
Yeah. I mean, it's a constant battle for any organization, even as people at home. Also, we all hear the horror stories of um, you know breaches in prominent organisations. I mean, we've had Ticketmaster, we've had NHS Trust in this country, as well as in terms of high profile,
Yeah.
and it's a constant challenge and a constant battle, and that's where you really need to have the agility and nimbleness to constantly try and be 1 foot ahead. Regardless of who may well be perpetrators at the other side, you need to respect in terms of your organization and what services your organization is doing and the data it holds, and do that well. It is just crazy, I think, in terms of the speed it's gone. I mean, crikey, a long time ago, you got various, let's not mention in terms of various products, but you got all the products 10, 15 years ago, you put on your PC and servers that you had in your nice server room humming away and kept that up to date and patches and fantastic. Now, you got threat prevention in terms of identification. All these, there's the cloud-based cyber services that are run to prevent anyone hoping to get into your
Yeah.
gateway.
Yeah.
And that is massive. That is massive. The market is moving so fast, and who'd have thought in you know 10 years time we'd be in such a position where it is high up there, and probably if not number one, for a lot of strategies and CIOs
Yeah.
of how we can be more secure and safer whilst we're delivering that flexibility for an organization.
Yeah, and I was just thinking we could relate that straight back to the exam question, or the topic we're discussing, which is honestly, hand on heart, I'm not sure I could see generative AI coming in as quickly as it did. And if we stick with cyber for a minute, it
Yeah.
also then and therefore also its use in cyber attacks.
Yeah.
Personally, I think it's got a lot of positives. So I don't mean to introduce generative on this call in a negative, but I'm just thinking more about, if you and I had sat down 3 years ago and said, there'll be a tool out there that will very rapidly be able to create an email that is so convincing, you'll think it, you'll
Yeah.
think you wrote it yourself. That's how convincing it will be.
Yeah.
it'll be so
Yeah.
powerful it could even fake you into thinking you sent it. The ultimate
Yeah.
pretending to be you to you kind of thing. And so because we couldn't really foresee that, you and I could very realistically have made some investments, and they could have been super tanker investments. And now there's a kind of a, hang on a minute, have I got a sunk cost? Is this obsolete? What on
Exactly.
earth? My business case had 5 years to run. All of these are, and we're only talking about one of 11. I've got 11 topics, Nick. I don't think we're going to get through all of them, but I was just kind of doing, all the different areas, that we
Yeah.
have to cover in
Y-
in tech strategy. Any one of
You're
those,
completely right.
yeah,
I mean, John, let's face it. You know, the emergence of the dark web and in terms of what people can find on the dark web and the generative AI, how people and certain organizations, criminal organizations, are now using it to, fake, ghost, interact,
yeah,
and it's learning, and on the flip side, we have the new breed of cyber organizations and tools that are also using generative AI to try and predict and identify and unpick
yeah.
what, it's a constant chess
It
game.
is.
It is a constant chess game.
It is, and we won't just stick on cyber, but just maybe to throw something else in before tech. Just looking
Hmm.
at you and me, I think both of us went across the analog to digital divide. We kind of
Yep.
experienced life before all of this and after. So before all of this, there were really, really sophisticated, I suppose they would have called them stings, yeah, sort of social engineering, people pretending to be other people, turning up with suitcases, all very elaborate to get something.
Complete.
And
Yeah.
and then we've gone through a period. I'm not saying this is exactly historically correct, but of kind of directly trying to get into systems, breaching the perimeter, either causing
Exactly. Yeah.
disruption, and then we got ourselves into the encrypting stuff or threatening to publish the ransomware phase. But it
Yeah.
looks like to me the tech that's available, it's almost like it's potentially going to go back to how it was because it's much easier for a criminal to get something just by getting someone to do something than it is to do all of this sophisticated,
Yes. Yeah.
attacks. So I think it's really interesting how the kind of the balance between it started off. I say this a lot in the kind of carbon space, then it got into the silicon, and
Yep.
then silicon carbon, and it seemed is it going back into the carbon space again? I mean, obviously, it's like a waterfall, isn't it, of
Yeah.
just constant threats and updates.
It is. I mean, we've both probably procured the social engineering tests to your security tests, people coming along, faking IDs and everything else to get into your building and access onto devices. And like I say, it's the perimeter breaches, and then we move into technology perimeter breaches from outside into constant threats and peppering the organization. And then it's about exploiting you know the social, economic, and staffing side from an AI intelligence point of view of understanding people and actually almost targeting certain sets of individuals that may well work for your organization and scraping everything from somebody's social media to think that how they create
Yeah,
an attack and vulnerability. And I have great sympathy for organizations where, and it's not malicious. When somebody accidentally clicks on these things, it's not malicious, but you know, it's it's so wide reaching now. There needs to be some fundamental shifts in cyber.
yeah,
There are some challenges. AI is going to play a greater part, in terms of, you know, um, artificial intelligent networks, in terms of how we mask, in terms of an organization to the outside world,
yeah,
to prevent such attacks. It, it's going to be a constant challenge, and I think the growth element, um, you know, of cyber and being a super tanker, but he's going to be one that requires nimbleness within an organization.
yeah,
You're right. You think some years ago we might have done a 5-year business plan, sunk our money in, do the depreciation of the 5 years for the service in terms of technology we bought,
yeah,
but actually 18 months down the line, uh, okay, we've been breached.
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah.
Why have we done this? Why have we done that? And you got to start again. And you got to justify it.
Yeah.
And I guess that's born by how do you break up that super tanker? You still got a super tanker services, but how do you know, you have one hold full of oil, you have one full hole of corn and coal and wheat and everything else, and those holds are different services,
Yeah.
in terms of, so
Yeah.
you try to make the super tanker as dynamic and agile and nimble as possible.
Yeah. And just makes me think of kind of one angle on that is to say, well, shall we consider a strategy where we have as few super tankers as possible? Sometimes that's
Yep.
known as, be really clear about what you want to be famous for in your technology,
Yeah.
and so, and then you think about, what's the relative effort that we have to put in as a team to keep all of this up to date, to go through all those factors you and I just discussed? Or do we go for a really good third party, a SaaS provider that has 200 times the number of people that we have looking at this, or maybe even 1,000 more, has got billions going into the product? Nick, I'm doing this deliberately, yeah, because I want to do this
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
there's got to be a realization that we can't. There's a limit to how many super tankers you can run as a team.
Yes. Yeah, completely. You've got to pick your battles on your super tankers. There are some things that will always be on the horizon that you're going to have to always keep, sailing through over the seas. But do you always have to be the captain of that sea? Do you actually not set the path and from the A to B and how we want to get there and everything else? And do you necessarily have to crew it? We see actually real life
Yeah.
super tankers, don't we?
Yeah.
The boat's registered somewhere and the crew's always from a different country or made up of different nationals and
I
cultures.
hate to say it, Nick, but I think there are some vehicles that are drones. I mean, we just can't
Well,
get away from this now. Satellite
no,
controlled.
exactly.
They might have folks on them, but I don't think the people on them. They're more like like the Tesla drivers when they were they were
Yes,
testing the self-driving. They're not
yeah,
doing anything other than
indeed.
ready to jump in if needed, but probably just
Yeah,
playing lots
yeah.
of boring card
And
games.
you see the humongous tankers, and they've got like 10 people on them.
Yes.
And you think in the old days there'd be, a crew of 2,000 managing in something. But you're right. I mean, I think it's very difficult for an organisation these days
I get it.
to have everything
Yeah.
in the own locker.
Yeah.
Because it's not just about having the quantity of staff, it's about having the quality, continuing investment in your staff and growing those staff and
Yeah.
making sure those staff are at the forefront, understand what's coming, so you're not caught on the hop. So it is a constant challenge and shift.
I really like the fact you've used that because I think it does two things. One, it highlights another really important bit of tech strategy, which is your carbon, your people,
Hmm.
and the skills that you need. But I think what it also does is it just raises the stakes again because you're employing people, you're offering them careers, and you want them to have a career that's going to be great for them for their whole life. You
Yeah.
don't want to train them up in something that's going to become obsolete. You want to avoid work experiences that are really negative, because of things, don't work, etc. So just in terms of talent acquisition and gaps in skills and stuff like that, Nick, what's your thoughts on that in our 1.5 versus 3-year decade?
I think you need a solid core team. You need a solid core team that is well grounded, has some real strong product information, but ultimately aren't the experts. And you balance that with either um, interim market, fixed term, or a provider in terms of partner that's agile, can bring in and drop and scale up if you need to. But you still have, that understanding and capability to challenge from internally
Yeah.
to whatever your additional carbon that you bring in to support the supertanker or an organization. I think it's always important that you have that equally balanced and in terms of positivity. And it also allows people to internally to grow and still explore and develop, but you haven't got your long, a team of 200 doing looking after one particular area anymore. It's a balance. You have two or three potentially that, depending on the size of your organization, sometimes it's only one person that is a multifaceted individual, an eclectic individual, probably like you and I, John, that, is strong in number of
Yeah,
areas.
I think that individual's got a name or a role, which is enterprise architect. But I would also
Hmm.
say that not all enterprise architects are created equally, and I think it's
Correct.
much more situational. So I think there is being, I think part of the CIO CTO role is actually really, you absolutely have to own your architecture. You can't give that to someone
Yeah,
else. You can have a team that are
correct.
supporting you with it, but you've really got to own those decisions, because that's definitely a super tanker area.
Yeah,
And then you'll have someone who's got vast experience, but they don't know the context of where they're working yet. And I
yeah,
think it's the two together. So I think a lot of people raise a very high expectation on enterprise architects, especially if you get one from a third party. Brain on a stick, comes in, does the work. Whereas actually, what you've got to give that sort of person is a real grounding in, what the business strategy is,
yeah,
and you have to be really careful about, what do we currently do. Actually, I might just want you to ignore that, because we're trying to change. This is what we're trying to achieve.
yeah.
Maybe giving them an outcome and not being too prescriptive. And then if you and I were hiring an enterprise architect, they could come in and just say, Nick, your architecture is rubbish. It could, and that could be like
Oh,
like the
completely.
sort of ugly baby, but also well, hang on a minute, someone's just
Yeah,
sunk one of my ships. So
yeah,
what's your thoughts on
completely,
that?
completely. An enterprise architect in an organization has to balance, that technology architecture that supports the business strategy. It's got to support where the organization's going, its vision, its mission, and to accomplish what we want to achieve, whether that's again, a mirrored 2, 3 year strategy that an organization may have, or longer. And it is that person's role internally to challenge, to set the context. And heaven forbid, what you don't want is come in, well, actually, you've gone down the complete wrong avenue. I use the analogy as well. You got two styrofoam cups and a piece of string against an IP telephony network. In terms of, and you've gone down the styrofoam cups and it's not quite right for what you need. And okay, so how have we got there? Why have we got there? But this is the business context. Is it affordability? Is our
Yeah,
growth plans,
yeah,
and everything else in
yeah,
terms of what the services we deliver? So there's no, we all know that externals come in with, start. You can have Mount Everest. We're going to conquer Mount Everest, and actually, you only want to get up the hill across the road.
yeah. And so it's kind of related to that, Nick. I kind of uh, quite like to look at tenure in terms of
Yeah,
number of budgets. So rather than say how many years have you been somewhere, I always like to say how many budgets have you had, because if you think about it,
yeah,
that's where you and I can really turn the dial, in the sense that you might go in somewhere and someone might say, well, and look, everyone listening to this who's had anything to do with strategy will have heard this, but we've got some legacy systems, yeah, or XYZ doesn't work anymore, or we've got a challenge with this bit of user experience, that sort of thing.
hmm,
But actually, I think it's right at our core, which is to say, okay, is that harming the business? If we fix it, is it going to help with the business plan? If
yeah,
you've got a yes to both of those, then it's like, right, I've got to get the money. I've got to write the business case. The
yes,
business case might be an opportunity cost of, well, we won't do this anymore if it's a fixed amount. But I think if you're successful, you might actually be able to increase overall technology spend. I think tech spend overall shouldn't be wasted. Yeah. So when we talk about
yeah,
reducing the cost of tech, I think what we're really saying is reducing inefficiency. But actually, if you've got some
yes,
tech that's really moving the dial, and maybe it's in the AI space, or maybe it's a thing you're doing with security or some of these other areas, and actually spending more in those areas, can be an advantage, or it can be a positive sign. So I
Yes.
was just sort of bringing in the money side, Nick, to the strategy, because you've
Yeah.
got to have
I mean,
if you haven't got a funded strategy, you haven't got a strategy, have you?
exactly. Everything has to be affordable. And with the current economic climate and challenges for organizations, every penny counts. You will always have the tankers that will just plough the seas and always go in terms of these are sunk costs, and
Yeah,
actually, it does what the business needs. It's a system. We don't need to change it yet. It's sunk. It does everything we want to do. It's going to manage our ability for the next three budgets easily in terms of stuff. But actually, we need to set the groundwork to do other things and improve other areas and areas, and like we need to, if we invest in you know AI or even greater cyber, we actually complement that system, actually give ourselves a better opportunity to probably start to think about reducing the complexity of that super tanker
yeah,
down to actually a more manageable solution that is more agile and nimble, because we don't need the whole monolithic piece that it is, that you have security, everything wrapped into it, but actually we're building layers
yeah.
to actually deliver services. And if we invest in layers, certain layers, it will help reduce in terms of cost and spend in other areas ideally.
Yeah, you're trying to highlight your no regrets, and you're trying
Yeah,
to
well,
highlight your, you know what, this will just raise benefits every, this just is a very good thing
yes,
for all
yes,
for all of the activity.
yeah,
Nick, as you said, you were in you've done a fair bit of time, if that's the right word, in public sector. So I
yeah,
have as well, and I'd say one of my delights, and this is going to sound a bit strange, Nick, for me to call this a delight, but when I was first, this is about 150 years ago, folks, but when I was first introduced to like the UK public sector business case, the short form, which I thought
yeah.
was pretty detailed, and then I saw the long form, I was like, oh my goodness me. And it wasn't until quite a few years later when I did my MBA where I was really picking up on all the different elements that government apply to when they're looking at cost. And obviously, it's not just
Mm,
the coin. And one of the things that's reminded me of that very recently is our ESG responsibilities.
yeah,
And the reason why I mention it is because legacy typically doesn't compute or doesn't have the most efficient computing model. The analogy I use is it's like you've got the engine on full throttle,
yeah,
but you're stopped at the traffic lights.
yeah,
So you're just revving up all that CPU all the time, as an
yeah,
example. And so so I've found there's a very strong ESG element that you can put into your business case. And the other one, Nick, is again with legacy, is having some sort of method to decide what order to do stuff.
yeah. I mean, going back to the public sector, we we've all encountered when we probably first started, like you say, you get the 150-page strategy and set it out in great detail, and you think, crikey, how are we ever going to fund this? And well, how do we get actually anything done if we've got to read and work through all this strategy? But things are moving forward. But you're right. I think you can't make a choice about a strategy in isolation from being a CIO or IT director. You can't make it in isolation. You have to obviously blend it. And I guess you should always more or less be the last person to write a strategy in an organization, because you're hoping that we've got the overall organizational strategy, then we'll have the finance people, we'll have the revenue income and all the other different services, how we're going to run the business. And ultimately you've got to take all that, dilute it, and think, how am I going to be the foundation? How am I going to prop all those up with my strategy? And
Yeah,
why, by engaging, and it is engagement, and working with colleagues, you've got to then understand of, so what is the burning platform? What is your burning thing? If somebody said, well, if we change this, we can increase our revenue by 50%, but actually if we don't change our finance system, we're not going to be compliant anymore. We've got new tax legislation coming through in
yeah,
terms of, okay, so how do we balance those off?
yeah,
And it is, you know, you're not doing horse trading, but you're sitting there at the board table and listening, hopefully, and taking all these snippets of challenges
yeah,
and taking that feed and then playing it back. But ultimately, you've almost generally got to be the last person that writes the strategy.
Yeah.
You'll always have your code. We'll have as code and things that we want to achieve and drive
Yeah.
and to support. But some of the major factors, you've got to use a foundation and be the last person, like I said.